You know what nobody talks about? The memories. Not the gentle, nostalgic kind that fade like watercolors in the rain, but the ones that arrive uninvited at 3 in the morning with crystal clarity. The kind that make you remember not just what happened, but the exact texture of the wallpaper, the precise tone of a voice, the way light fell through a window on an afternoon 30 years ago. If you're watching this, if you've experienced any form of spiritual awakening, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And here's what makes it even more confusing. Everyone tells you to let go of the past, to live in the present moment, to release what no longer serves you. Yet your childhood memories haven't just stayed with you, they've become more vivid, more insistent, more impossible to forget. Before we dive deeper into this mystery, make sure you're subscribed to Alan Watts Insights. Hit that notification bell, because we're exploring the hidden truths that most spiritual teachings won't touch. This channel is dedicated to honest wisdom, not comfortable platitudes. Now, let's talk about why you can't forget. There's a peculiar phenomenon that happens when consciousness begins to wake up to itself. It's not what the books promise. They tell you about expanded awareness, about living fully in the now, about transcending the stories of your past. And all of that is true, in its own way. But what they don't tell you is this: before you can transcend your past, you must first see it with a clarity you've never experienced before. And that seeing, it feels less like liberation and more like being haunted by a ghost that has your face, your voice, your childhood bedroom perfectly preserved in excruciating detail. Let me paint you a picture of what this really looks like. You're sitting in meditation, or perhaps you're washing dishes, doing something utterly ordinary, when suddenly you're 7 years old again. Not remembering being 7, actually being there, feeling the weight of confusion in your small chest when the adults around you acted in ways you couldn't understand. You remember the exact pattern of cracks in the ceiling you stared at when you needed to disappear. You remember the specific way you learned to make yourself small, to read the emotional temperature of a room before you entered it, to become whoever you needed to be to stay safe. And here's the thing that makes you question your entire spiritual journey: you remember it all more clearly now than you did before you woke up. This isn't what you signed up for, is it? You did the work. You meditated, you went to therapy, you read the books, you watched the videos. You learned about presence and consciousness and the eternal now. You were promised peace. You were promised freedom from the past. Instead, you got a photographic archive of every moment that shaped the person you're now trying to realize never truly existed. It feels like a cosmic joke. It feels like maybe you did something wrong, like perhaps you're not actually awakening at all, but losing your mind in slow motion. Let me tell you something that might bring relief. You're not going crazy, and you're not doing it wrong. What you're experiencing is one of the most misunderstood aspects of genuine spiritual transformation. Alan Watts once spoke about the ego as a hallucination, a persistent illusion of a separate self enclosed in a bag of skin. But here's what he didn't often emphasize: what gets lost in the beautiful philosophy to see through a hallucination, you must first understand how it was constructed. You can't dismantle something you can't see, and your childhood, that's where the hallucination was built, piece by careful piece, experience by formative experience. The reason you can't forget isn't because you're trapped in the past. It's because you're finally seeing, with the eyes of consciousness, exactly how the prison was built. And you can only walk out of a prison whose walls you can clearly perceive. Think about it this way. Imagine you've been living in a house your entire life, a house with peculiar architecture, odd angles, doors that lead nowhere, windows that won't open. You've navigated this house in the dark for so long that you know every corner, every step, every place to avoid. That house is your ego structure, your sense of separate self. Now imagine someone turns on the lights for the first time. Suddenly, you can see everything. The water damage in the corner from that time when you were 5 and learned it wasn't safe to cry. The boarded-up window from when you were 8 and discovered that your authentic self made others uncomfortable. The reinforced door from when you were 12 and decided it was better to be alone than to be hurt again. You're not suddenly dwelling in the past. You're seeing, for the first time, the architecture of your own consciousness. And childhood is where the foundation was poured. There's a concept in psychology called autobiographical memory, the personal history we carry that tells us who we are. For most people, these memories are hazy, selective, reconstructed. They remember the story they've told themselves about their childhood, not the actual experience. But something shifts when awareness deepens. The stories dissolve, and underneath them you find the raw footage, unedited and achingly real. Research in neuroscience tells us that childhood experiences, especially emotionally intense ones, create what are called flashbulb memories. These are memories encoded with such vividness that they persist with unusual clarity throughout life. When you were a child navigating difficult circumstances, your developing brain was cataloging everything with survival-level intensity. Where were the safe people? What patterns predicted danger? How could you adapt to stay okay? That information got burned into your neural architecture, not as optional data, but as essential survival instructions. And here's where it gets fascinating: the same hypervigilance that traumatized children develop, that constant scanning of environment and emotion, that heightened state of awareness that feels like curse. That's remarkably similar to what spiritual practitioners spend decades trying to cultivate. It's called witness consciousness, the ability to observe thoughts and feelings without identification. You developed it at 6 years old because you had to. Other people are trying to learn in meditation retreats what you learned by necessity in your childhood living room. The difference is, they're learning it as a tool for freedom. You learned it as a tool for survival. And now, as you awaken, you're discovering that your childhood wound and your spiritual gift are made of the same substance. But let's be honest about what this means in practical terms. It means that while other people are being told to let go of the past, you're experiencing something entirely different. You're not holding on to the past. The past is revealing itself to you with a clarity that feels like time travel. You remember conversations word for word. You remember the quality of silence in rooms where important things went unspoken. You remember the specific way you fragmented yourself to cope, how you sent part of yourself away and learned to function as a fraction of who you were. And now that you're waking up, now that consciousness is expanding, all those fragmented parts are showing themselves, carrying their memories, asking to be seen. This isn't pathology. This is integration trying to happen. The Buddhist traditions talk extensively about letting go, about non-attachment, about not clinging to the narratives of self. And these teachings are profound and true. But there's a step that often gets skipped in popular spirituality, a step that the genuine traditions never omit. You cannot let go of what you haven't first fully held. You cannot release what you've never truly acknowledged. You cannot transcend a story you've never allowed yourself to fully see. The memories that won't leave you alone, they're not obstacles to your awakening. They're the very substance of it. Each memory is a thread in the tapestry of ego, and you must see every thread if you want to understand that the tapestry was never who you truly are. There's a reason the concept of the inner child has become so central in spiritual work, even though it sounds like psychological jargon rather than mystical truth. The inner child isn't a metaphor. It's the living presence of those younger versions of you who learned to cope, to hide, to perform, to survive. They're still there, carrying their experiences, frozen in the moments when they decided who you would need to become. And spiritual awakening, it's not about abandoning them or transcending them. It's about finally turning toward them with the awareness you now possess and saying, I see you. I see what happened. I see how you learned to protect us. And I see that who we truly are was never damaged by any of it. This is why you can't forget. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because forgetting would mean leaving parts of yourself behind, and genuine awakening is about integration, not amputation. Western spirituality has made a terrible mistake by suggesting that enlightenment means rising above your humanity, transcending your story, becoming some sort of detached awareness floating above the messy reality of having been a child who hurt. That's not awakening. That's dissociation dressed in spiritual language. True awakening includes everything, rejects nothing, turns away from no part of your experience. It says, yes, all of this happened, and none of it changed the fundamental nature of what I am. Alan Watts spoke often about the gap between our true nature and the image we have of ourselves. He described how we confuse the menu for the meal, the map for the territory, the idea of ourselves for the living reality. Your childhood memories, especially the ones that won't fade, are showing you exactly how that confusion was created. Every memory is pointing to a moment when you learned to be an idea of yourself, rather than the actual experiencing of life. When you were 5 and learned to smile when you didn't feel happy. When you were 9 and learned to hide your sensitivity because it wasn't valued. When you were 13 and learned that your authentic reactions made things worse, not better. Each memory shows you a moment when the false self was constructed, when you wrapped another layer around your true nature, when you added another piece to the armor that would eventually become your prison. The spiritual journey is sometimes described as a return to innocence, and this is true, but not in the way most people imagine. It's not about forgetting what happened or pretending you're untouched by experience. It's about seeing through the conclusions you drew, the decisions you made about who you would need to be. That seeing requires remembering. It requires looking directly at the moments when you learned to be someone other than what you are. This is why the memories persist. They're not punishing you. They're showing you the invisible cage so you can finally see the door was never locked. There's a particular kind of pain that comes with this seeing, and we should be honest about it. It would be easier if awakening meant the past simply dissolved, if all the difficult memories just faded into irrelevance. But consciousness doesn't work that way. Light doesn't destroy what it illuminates, it reveals it. And what it reveals in your case is the precise ways a sensitive, aware, deeply feeling child learned to become numb, defended, acceptable. You see how much you lost. You see what you had to give up. You see the price you paid for safety, for love, for belonging. And you see how young you were when you paid it. This seeing hurts, it's supposed to. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because grief is the appropriate response to recognizing what was asked of you before you had any ability to refuse. But here's what happens on the other side of that grief, and this is the part that makes the whole impossible journey worth it. You begin to recognize that who you truly are was never actually damaged. The child who learned to hide, to perform, to fragment, that child made brilliant, creative, necessary adaptations. But underneath every adaptation, untouched by every wound, who you actually are remained constant. The awareness that looked through your eyes when you were 3 years old is the same awareness looking through them now. It hasn't changed. It hasn't been diminished. It watched you construct the false self, and it's watching you deconstruct it now, and it remains eternally what it has always been: aware, present, whole, completely okay. The memories persist because they're the breadcrumbs leading you back home. Each one is saying, look here, this is where you learned to leave yourself. This is where you decided you weren't safe as you were. This is where you made a choice to become someone else. And as you see each of these moments with adult awareness, something shifts. You don't have to undo them or fix them or make them different than they were. You simply have to see them clearly enough to recognize that the child who made those decisions did so with the limited understanding available at the time, and the one who you truly are was never defined by those decisions. The decisions created a character, a personality, an ego structure, but they never touched what you fundamentally are. This is the teaching that gets lost when spirituality becomes too comfortable, too neat, too focused on feeling good rather than becoming free. Real freedom includes your childhood, your memories, your wounds. It doesn't transcend them in the sense of rising above them and leaving them behind. It transcends them by seeing through them, by recognizing that they're the content of consciousness but not its essence. You are not your memories. But you must fully own your memories to realize you're not them. This is the paradox. This is why you can't forget, why you shouldn't try to forget, why the remembering itself is part of the awakening. Think of it like this. Imagine you've been watching a movie your entire life, believing it was reality. The movie is compelling, dramatic, filled with characters and plot twists and emotional scenes. Then one day you realize you're in a theater, watching a screen. The recognition doesn't make the movie disappear. It continues playing. But now you know it's a movie. The childhood you remember, all those vivid scenes that won't fade, they're like that. They're still playing on the screen of memory, perhaps more clearly than ever. But you're beginning to recognize that what you are is not the character in the movie. You're the awareness in which the movie appears, the screen on which it plays, the space that holds it all without being defined by any of it. And here's something beautiful that happens as this recognition deepens. The memories don't hurt in the same way anymore. They're still there. You can still access every detail, every moment, every experience. But they lose their power to define you, to tell you who you are, to limit what's possible for you now. They become simply what happened, interesting perhaps, informative certainly, but no longer the author of your identity. This is true letting go. Not forgetting, not repressing, not transcending in some spiritual bypass way, but seeing so clearly that you recognize, yes, all of this happened to the body, to the personality, to the character called by your name. And none of it happened to what you actually are. The spiritual teachers who tell you to let go of the past, to live only in the present moment, they're not wrong, but they're often incomplete. Because the present moment includes your memories. The now includes your past, not as something separate from this moment, but as content arising in awareness right now. When a childhood memory surfaces, it's not actually happening in the past. It's happening now. The remembering is a present moment experience. And meeting that memory with awareness, with compassion, with the recognition that it's showing you something essential about the construction of your false self, that's fully present. That's as alive to this moment as anything else could be. So what do you do with all of this? How do you live with memories that won't fade? With a childhood that remains vivid while everyone tells you to move on? You stop trying to forget. You stop treating your persistent memories as a problem to solve or a sign that you're spiritually failing. Instead, you get curious. When a memory surfaces, instead of pushing it away or drowning in it, you ask, what is this showing me? Where did I learn to become someone other than what I am? What decision did I make about myself, about life, about what was safe or possible? You examine the memory not to dwell in it, but to see through it, to recognize the moment when the false self was constructed. And then, and this is crucial, you turn toward the younger you in that memory with the awareness and compassion you have now. Not to change what happened, not to rescue or fix, but simply to witness with love. To say, I see you. I see how hard you tried. I see the impossible situations you navigated. I see your creativity, your resilience, your brilliant survival strategies. And I see that who you truly are was never damaged by any of it. This is not therapy in the conventional sense, though it may be therapeutic. This is recognizing that the consciousness which is aware right now is the same consciousness that was aware then. And it never needed saving because it was never in danger. The personality was in danger. The body was in danger. The sense of separate self was certainly in danger. But what you actually are, that was and is and always will be untouchable, undamageable, complete. This changes everything, not in a dramatic moment of permanent enlightenment, but in a gradual, organic recognition that permeates your entire experience of being alive. The memories remain, the past remains, but your relationship to it transforms completely. You're no longer the victim of your childhood, but you're also not trying to be its hero, rewriting it into something empowering. You're simply the awareness in which all of it appears, the space vast enough to hold every contradiction, every wound, every moment of beauty and terror, without being reduced to any of it. And something else happens too, something subtle but profound. You begin to forgive yourself for all the ways you tried to forget, for all the methods you used to escape, for all the years you spent trying to become someone who didn't remember. You see that those attempts were part of the same survival strategy, the same brilliant creativity that got you through childhood in the first place. Of course you tried to forget. Of course you built walls around certain memories, certain feelings, certain truths. Of course you did, and now you don't need those walls anymore. Not because you've transcended the need for protection, but because you're beginning to recognize that what you truly are never needed protection in the first place. The spiritually awake person who can't forget their childhood is not broken. They're seeing clearly. They're experiencing one of the fundamental movements of consciousness, knowing itself, the recognition that every experience, every memory, every moment of joy and pain and confusion has appeared in the same vast awareness that is your true nature, and that awareness has never been touched by anything that appeared within it, just as the mirror is never changed by any image reflected in its surface, just as the sky is never damaged by the weather that moves through it, just as the ocean is never defined by the waves that rise and fall on its surface. Your memories are vivid because you're finally really here to see them. You're finally present enough, aware enough, conscious enough to witness what actually happened rather than the story you told yourself about what happened. This is not a curse. This is clarity. This is the light turning on in the house you've lived in all your life, showing you every corner, every hidden space, every place where you learned to hide from yourself. And as you see it all, as you stop running from the memories that won't fade, something miraculous happens. You begin to recognize that you were never defined by any of it, the child who experienced all of that. You have endless compassion for that child, but you're also beginning to see that what you fundamentally are was present before that child learned to become a false self, remained present through every adaptation and wound and survival strategy, and is still here now, watching the whole story with patient, loving awareness. So let the memories come. Stop fighting them. Stop treating them as evidence that you're not spiritual enough, not awakened enough, not doing it right. They're here because you're finally strong enough, present enough, conscious enough to see what you couldn't afford to see before. Every memory that surfaces is an opportunity, not to dwell in the past, but to recognize in this present moment that what you are is not the story, not the character, not the wounded child, or the adapted adult, or any of the identities you've worn. What you are is the awareness itself, vast and unchanging and completely untouched by any experience, and yet intimate enough to hold every experience with perfect presence and infinite compassion. This is why you can't forget your childhood. Not because you're trapped there, but because seeing it clearly is how you finally become free. Trust the process. Trust that your consciousness knows what it's doing, what it needs to see, what must be integrated before it can be released. Trust that the memories that persist are not obstacles but doorways. And most of all, trust that what you truly are has never needed healing, has never needed fixing, has never needed to forget. It simply needed to be recognized, to be seen, to be acknowledged as what has always been here, watching everything, loving everything, remaining forever free in the midst of every experience. You are that. You have always been that. And the memories that won't fade are simply showing you, over and over again, everything that you are not, so that what you truly are can finally, fully recognize itself. If this resonates with you, if you've felt alone in this experience of vivid memories that everyone else tells you to release, you're not alone. Subscribe to Alan Watts Insights for more honest explorations of what spiritual awakening actually feels like. Not the sanitized version, but the real, messy, beautiful truth of consciousness waking up to itself. Leave a comment sharing your experience, Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And remember, you're not forgetting because you're finally, truly remembering who you are.